All right, so we're going to start the first lecture of the semester. This is kind of a combined lecture of training principles and training the aerobic system. We'll start with pretty simple basic training principles, principles that should be involved in all training programs, no matter if it's aerobic system, anaerobic system, whoever you're training from. Athletic clientele, older adults, young, these principles are universal for everything. So we'll start there. There's a lot of slides, so I might break this video up into a couple of different parts so it's easier to upload and a little bit more manageable to watch. Couple side notes. If there's any, I apologize if there's any technical difficulties. I'll work on those hopefully throughout the semester and make sure everything's cleaned up. If there's any loud noises, I apologize. My furnace is loud. I'm kind of hiding in my spare bedroom. I have a dog. Hopefully it doesn't bark too much. Hopefully it doesn't bark at all. But other than that, hopefully this will work out fairly well, and we'll see how this goes. So again, we'll start with first part, training principles, and then I'll probably cut the video, and we will have a second video on training the aerobic system. So when we think about exercise training principles, really what we're looking for is how to find adaptations for performance. Either building them through periodization structurally and program design, but usually we'll have some kind of specific task to achieve an end result or an end goal. So the basic approach to physiological conditioning applies similarly to both men and women. There's really no massive gender differences in most things. And so when it comes to population-based, most of these principles will apply to everybody. Both males and females tend to respond and adapt to training in similar ways. So gender doesn't play a massive role in differences in the way the body responds, especially in the physiological way. If we were talking hormonal, a little more endocrine, yeah, we might see some different training principle or different responses to training. But when we're thinking more physiological, the way the heart pumps, or the changes to the heart, the changes to the cardiovascular system, the changes to the muscle, they're fairly similar between sexes. So the first principle, we're going to talk about three principles. And all three principles, like I said, should be in all training programs. The first is specificity. It's pretty straightforward. It's essentially, this principle is, if you just take up the first word, is about being very specific. So exercise training specificity refers to adaptations in metabolic and physiological functions that depend upon the type and mode of overload imposed. So what's that saying? It's saying that if you want to, depending on what you do, will give you specific responses. So if you want to improve at swimming, you have to swim. You have to be specific in that mode of exercise. If you want to improve your cardiovascular function, you probably need to do some kind of cardiovascular physical activity. If you want to be better at speaking Spanish, you're going to have to practice speaking Spanish. It is the specificity principle. It's about being as specific as possible within your training regimen so to get the results that you're looking for. Most effective eval of sport-specific performance occurs when measurement most closely simulates the actual activity. So if we're looking to test in some way, if I wanted to know how your improvement in Spanish is, I wouldn't test you in Chinese. If I want to know how well your increases in strength are coming, I wouldn't ask you to run 5 miles. And again, if I wanted to see your improvement in cardiovascular fitness, I might have you do a VO2 max test. I wouldn't have you do a 1 rep max test. So if we're looking to test, we need to be as specific as possible so we know either the movement patterns or the parts of the body that need to be stimulated or have been forced to adapt to that training protocol. We need to be specific in those tests and training. So the real definition of specificity is really the SAID principle, specific adaptations to opposed demands. So physical adaptations are specific to the muscles trained, intensity of exercise, and metabolic demands of exercise. So again, you might have heard the SAID, S-A-I-D principle before, specific adaptations to impose demands. We know that what you do in the gym, what you do At a training facility, we have some carryover into the field, onto the field, into real life, into the workplace, whatever it might be. Um, Never really 100% carryover. So let's say we're doing resisted sprinting to improve our sprint times. Yeah, we might improve on our sprint times in the gym, but it doesn't mean that all that always carries over into what we do into the field. So it's really hard to carry everything over. When we're picking exercises, in terms of specificity, when we're thinking about training protocols and what we want to build, we want to think of things that have very similar neuromuscular coordination. So if I'm working with someone coming back from workman's comp that used to be someone that hung drywall, or a construction worker, maybe they injured their shoulder, and we need to come up with similar patterns within exercises. Maybe it's overhead shoulder press to retrain that neuromuscular pattern for what that person might do. Same with a football player or soccer player or whatever sport it might be. If we could come really close to finding those same kind of neuromuscular patterns, those movement patterns in the gym, in the training facility, the more likely that that's going to carry over onto the field. Can we recruit the same muscles? Can we recruit the same motor units? Can we train those? Can we stimulate those? Can we overload those? If we can, high likelihood that they will have to adapt. And if we're specific to those muscles, hopefully that can transfer over to the field. So when we think of types of sport or energy systems needed for sport, or life for that matter, we can be very specific into what energy systems we're going to train. And we could think of the sport as in something very explosive, something that might be explosive but might take a little bit longer, like an extended sprint. And we could think of things that are more of a sprinting endurance style sport and then a purely endurance style sport. So if we have something like an Olympic lift, a field event in track and field, those things are very quick. They might take milliseconds to, maybe not milliseconds, that would be too short, couple seconds at most. So we need to know that, okay, these athletes are going to be using this ATP system. We need to maybe be as specific as possible to training that system in the gym. That would be saying that, does that mean that a shot putter, pole vaulter, javelin thrower needs to be extremely cardiovascular fit? We should be having them run miles on end? No, absolutely not. That has nothing to do with what they need to do. That's being non-specific to their needs. When we start thinking of sports like soccer, basketball, hockey, that becomes a little bit more complicated because they're going to use a couple different energy systems. So we're going to have to kind of move around, maybe do things that are really short bursts to things that might be a little bit more long distance, because they're going to need to use both ATP-PC and also a lot of their oxidative phosphorylation. So we're going to have to kind of go back and forth a little bit with their training. And then when we're looking to train a marathon runner, yeah, it's probably useful at times to work on power and strength, but ideally they're going to probably need to improve their aerobic endurance, so we're going to have to spend a lot of time on that. So we can be very specific to energy demands of an athlete or a person as well. It doesn't really need to be an athlete, it could be anybody. Oh, so I got a little ahead of myself. Here's the SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. Again, this is essentially that definition again. When we think of adaptations and metabolic and physiological functions, depend on three things: intensity, duration, frequency, and mode. So frequency is probably one of the most important ones for us. No, probably not true. Intensity, excuse me, is probably one of the most important adaptations that we're going to try to, or training methods that we're going to affect adaptations, is the intensity, but they all play a role. We could affect intensity, duration, frequency, and mode, and all of them could play a role in adaptations. Specific overload of short duration induces strength and power, and specific endurance training is more aerobic. So as the last image showed, if we're more endurance based, more specific to that, we're going to have more aerobic changes. If we go really high intensity, really heavy, really short bursts, it's going to be more anaerobic. So here's an image, or some images, just to kind of hit home the point of specificity, and that is just looking at the transfer training results. We might have the image at the top here, an individual flipping a tire. That movement pattern of using the lower body, explode through the hips, push through the arms to flip that tire is very similar to the linemen at practice pushing the sled. As you see, they're going to go through triple extension through the hips, push with the upper body, try to push that sled, and then hopefully when it really matters at game time, when they're on the field, all that practice and motor unit recruitment can then be transferred to the field. So that'd be carryover effect. Now, everything isn't carried over, but hopefully what we're doing in the gym does play a role. So it can transfer from exercise to sport, from potentially exercise to exercise. And what I mean by that is, if you're practicing to do an Olympic lift, does working on your deadlift then help transfer into aspects of an Olympic lift? Stuff like that you could transfer from exercise to exercise. As a beginner, the training age will play a role in specificity. How specific you could be in the movement with someone that's very advanced can have a lot more carryover effect than maybe someone that's a beginner that's never even performed the movement. So you might not be able to get so technical with someone that's really new. You might not be as specific. You might be a lot more general with someone that's new to an exercise or new to a workout program compared to an athlete that's high-level athlete where you can be very specific. Hopefully, those minor little changes can make big differences within the game or the field. When we think of training for the aerobic system, overload must do two things: engage appropriate muscles required for the activity and provide exercise at a sufficient level to stress the cardiovascular system. So if you want to improve your cardiovascular endurance, your VO2 max, let's say you want to improve it in running, you need to run. You need to work the muscles that are important for running. Swimming, might help. Biking might help. Rowing might help. But there are muscles that are used during running that might not be engaged at the same amount in other types of activity. So we need to make sure that we use the appropriate muscles required for the activity. And also, if you're an elite athlete, will walking improve your cardiovascular system? No, probably not. You need to get to a sufficient stress level for that to occur. Little improvement is noted when measuring aerobic capacity with dissimilar exercises. So if you want to be a better runner, you need to run. If you want to be a better runner and you swim all the time because that's your method of improving your running, it's not going to work. Okay, those exercises are very different movement patterns. Greatest improvement occurs when test exercise duplicates training exercise. So if you're looking to test someone's VO2 max and they've been swimming, or actually I can take it back. If you look to test someone's VO2 max and they've been running consistently, that's their mode of exercise, that's their mode of training. But you decide that you want to test them on a bike. Those are very, very different things. So you might not see the same improvement, especially when you're looking at testing, if you're testing two different modes of exercise. Here, there was a research study done with swimmers, and they looked at swim training and its improvement on VO2 max, or running and its improvement on VO2 max. So they saw that swim training improved VO2 max by 11% when measured during swimming, but only 1.5% measured during running. So what they essentially did was they took swimmers. The swimmers could either train in the pool or train on a treadmill. Now again, these are swimmers, and they want to test them in the pool to see how they improved. Well, their VO2 max went up 11%. Their swim times went up 34%. Now you took these people that have been training on a treadmill, put them back in the pool. Let's see what their VO2 max is. VO2 max only went up 1.5. Max run time went up 4.6. So you see that if you take a swimmer and try to improve their VO2 max via running, or try to improve their max via swimming, you see that there's significant specificity to that sport being performed. The body has specific local changes, so overloading specific muscles with endurance training enhances performance and aerobic power by facilitating O2 transport and O2 by those working muscles. So again, going back to running and swimming, if you don't ever run but you want to improve your running, you're going to realize that when you go for a run, your legs are going to be burning. You're going to feel that acidic environment in your legs. I was going to say, that lactic acid buildup, but you're going to see that pH change in your legs, and all of a sudden your legs are going to be burning. Well, the more and more you run, the more that the muscles specific to running, quadriceps, hamstrings, calves, glutes, will start getting more blood flow, more and more activity, more and more O2 transport and byproduct out. So greater blood flow to these active tissues, increased circulation, increased redistribution from your cardiac output to push blood to those working muscles. And then over time, the combined effect of circulation and improved cardiac output, pumping and pumping and pumping more and more blood into, you have these very dense capillary beds around these muscles now that are able to supply more oxygen, supply more red blood cells to pull out more byproduct, and you could then sustain a higher intensity for a longer given time. So your muscles become very specific to the changes that you hopefully are applying based on your training protocols. So specificity was the first principle. Be as specific as possible with everything. The body reacts that way. The next is overload. So the body needs to be challenged to see adaptation. So achieving appropriate overload requires either manipulating frequency, intensity, duration, or combination of all of the above, which means that we either can work out more, we can work out harder, we can work out longer, or a combination of all the above. But something has to change for you to see an adaptation. So the concept of individualized and progressive overload applies to everybody. So what that means is that we'll talk about progressive overload here, but as we make things more difficult, as we start to improve and adapt, we need to make things more difficult. And it needs to be on an individual basis. It's not that easy to just say, everybody's going to move up in a stepwise fashion every single time at this exact increment. Some people improve really quickly. Some people take more time. But no matter what, we need to progress and we need to challenge the body. Maybe if you're thinking about running, I don't ever run. So if you were to write a program for me and write a program for a marathon runner, they might be able to increase their mileage a lot faster than me. But I still need to increase. Maybe I don't increase a mile a week. Maybe I increase 800 meters a week. Maybe they increase 10 miles a week. That's because because your programs need to be individualized. No matter what, though, I still have to make things more difficult. Maybe I run a little harder. Maybe I run a little more often. Maybe I run slightly farther. But something has to change. You can, the bottom bullet there, you could achieve health-related benefits of regular exercise with very little intensity, very little is bad one, lower effort intensity but more volume than required to improve aerobic capacity. So when you're thinking about aerobics, you don't necessarily always have to bust your butt as hard as possible. Sometimes you just need to increase the volume. Okay, so you can actually see changes at a relatively low intensity, 70% heart rate max, something like that. That's not that demanding, and you'll still see improvements. The issue you might have, though, if you're thinking about the overload principle, is you can't just stay at that. You could stay at that, you just need to go more often. Maybe you're training 3 days a week at 70%. You don't necessarily need to move up to 75 or 80 or 90%. You might just have to start training 4 days a week at 70%. That increase in volume, or maybe a little bit longer distance at 70%. And you could see some changes in the aerobic capacity. So, in terms of overload, must be above the habitual level, which means that whatever your baseline is, or your homeostasis, whatever you want to think about it is, it has to be more than that. You could increase intensity or volume. You can add new drills, change things up, different exercises. Load must be manipulated carefully, so you can't just dramatically jump up. You got to be smart about how you manipulate the load. And that, again, load could be resistance and it could be distance. It could be a couple of things. It could be a bunch of different things. So really the demand on the body. And then progressive resistance exercise means that we need to progress accordingly. As we progress, we need to be smart about how we add weight, subtract weight, and so on down the line. We got to make sure we're doing this in a stepwise fashion that's comfortable, safe, but challenging for the individual, so that the body is still forced to adapt. So for adaptations to occur, the demand of the exercise must exceed what we're used to. So if you see the black box where it says workout, we'll go to the gym, we cause some kind of stress, damage, fatigue, any way you want to look at it. That's where you see depletion on the screen. The horizontal line, let's go with it here. This horizontal line right here is your initial level of preparedness. So how fit you are right now, how prepared you are for that exercise. As you train, you become more and more fatigued. Then training is over. You're extremely fatigued, depleted. You'll give your body time to rest, restitution, rest to recover. As you do that, and you get closer and closer and closer to back to healthy, back to homeostasis, what the body will end up doing is what's called supercompensation, this little arc right here above the initial level of preparedness. This is the body preparing itself, compensating for you to do the same workout again. So what happens here is you work out, you damage the body, or you stress the body. What the body wants to do is it wants to repair itself and prepare itself for you to do the exact same workout again. But this time, if you do that, it's going to have a better level of preparedness for that same workout. So it's going to overcompensate. If you then work out in this supercompensation phase, somewhere in here, you have a greater level of preparedness, essentially what seems like a greater level of fitness, and then you could essentially train harder. If you were to train down here, you'd still not be recovered. If you were to train over here, you might have rested too long to really see any of those changes being made. Okay, so this is essentially called the supercompensation theory. That challenges the body prepares itself, it wants to come back stronger than it was before. And what it does is it supercompensates. Just in case you want to do that same workout again, you won't be as damaged, as bad. It's preparing itself for you, for your workouts. So here's another image like that. This dashed line here is fairly easy training. You don't have that much fatigue, minor fatigue. You won't see that great of overcompensation. So you don't do anything too hard on the body. The body's not going to react by saying, oh, you worked out. Yeah, it was a mild workout. I'm not going to really recover from that. I'm not going to really try to challenge myself to adapt to that workout. I don't really have to do much. You want a nice light jog. Okay, maybe you'll recover and a little bit of compensation for that. Or here's the dotted one down here. You really kicked your butt in the gym. You really went hard. That's a lot of fatigue. Well, it's going to take a long time to recover. Maybe so much that you only can just get back to baseline. Some people have done that, where they work so hard. They're always working so hard. They're always fatigued that they just don't let themselves repair and recover. The solid line is going to be essentially what would look like your perfect training load here. A decent amount of fatigue, a good amount of rest. The body's going to overcompensate or supercompensate, either way you want to look at it, same word, to prepare itself for this workout again. And if you could work out somewhere under this curve, you're going to have a new level of fitness to train at. You're really going to be able to challenge the body. So what this is actually called is the general adaptation syndrome. Hans Selye was a psychiatrist. They usually look at this in more of a psychological setting, but the body reacts the same way. So we have a couple different images here. The top left one is the simplest to look at. Here you are at homeostasis. This is your initial level of preparedness, your fitness level. Then you cause some kind of damage, some kind of stressor is invoked on the body. Usually a workout is the way we would think about it. So the body goes into what's called an alarm stage. So the body has to respond to the stressor, and it usually changes and lowers its resistance. It's a stress has come down, you kind of start to fatigue, you start to accept it, you start to go into a more of a fatigued state. Then the body will start to actually fight it. If the stressor continues, the body mobilizes to withstand the stress and return to normal. If it becomes more and more and more and more difficult, or the stressor doesn't go away, you end up reach a stage of exhaustion. So this is all saying here the same thing. Here is homeostasis, this blue line, onset of a stressor. Something can be threatening, exhilarating, a workout, could be anything like that. The body goes responds to the stressor with changes that lower the resistance. If the stressor continues to mobilize to withstand the stress and return to normal. Then if we keep going, exhaustion, ongoing extreme stressors eventually deplete the body's resources, so we function at a less than normal. If it keeps going in, the stressor just keeps going and going and going, the body resources are completely depleted. If you give yourself some time to recover, you'll return to homeostasis. So this is essentially the general adaptation syndrome. There's an alarm stage, a resistance stage, and an exhaustion stage. Body kind of is put into shock. Sometimes you see this as shock stage. Then the body's going to fight that. And then if that, stressor goes away, good, you've repaired yourself. You prepared yourself for that kind of stress. But if that stressor never leaves or keeps going, at some point you just get exhausted. You're going to just run out of energy, you run out of resources to fight it. Now, when we think of stressors, most of the time we think of stressors in the bottom here as training. Now, there are other things that come into people's lives that can be thought of as stress. Work, school for you right now, social life, sleep, nutrition. All these things could be stressors. All these things the body has to fight and adapt to. If you just continue, if you think of this as school, if school is just beating you down, you have finals, you have projects, and then now on top of that, you have work, you're working overtime, then you have family issues, then you have financial issues, then you're not getting enough sleep, then it's snowing out, and it's freezing out, and it's dark out, and all these things add on top. So it becomes more and more and more, and you're fighting it, and you're fighting it, and you're fighting it. And there's going to come a time where if you don't figure out a way to handle that level of stress, you're going to probably get sick. You're going to just give up. You're going to get tired. And some of you have probably been in that situation where it's just thing after thing after thing just won't end. It's just, why does things keep happening? And then you're just exhausted. But it doesn't go away. And you end up, a lot of times you get sick. Your body just can't fight it anymore. So that's the general adaptation syndrome. You will fight it as hard as you can until you just can't fight it anymore. But usually you come out stronger if the stressor stops. And that's kind of a story, kind of moral of, it seems like college and life, how much can someone handle? Can you fight through it? And if you could fight through it, you'll come out better on the other end. You come out a stronger individual, a smarter individual, and so on. That's essentially the general adaptation, and the body reacts the same way in terms of training. We put a stress on the body recovers from that, and because of that recovery, because we took that stress away and the body was allowed to recover, we're then going to be now more prepared and a better level of fitness and a better state than we were in the beginning. And then we could do the alarm stage again. We could add the stress again and repeat and repeat and repeat, hopefully continually getting better and better and better. You have to understand that there's always individual differences. Everybody responds differently. So one program isn't for everybody. Some people are people that could take an exercise, run with it, and be great at it. Some people struggle with it. Some people will take a program and get really strong, where other people won't get very strong. Some people will lose weight right away. Other people just won't. Everybody's very different. You have to understand that. You're going to have to be, and this goes for all fields: occupational therapy, physical therapy, personal training, coaching. It doesn't matter. You can't look at every person as the same person. Even if you're like, well, you have a torn rotator cuff, this is what we have to do to fix it: internal, external rotations, blah, 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 blah. All these exercises. Well, you know what? Maybe for some people that works. Maybe for others you need to change it up. Maybe it hurts them. Maybe they need more weight, maybe less weight, maybe more reps, less reps. All those kind of things play a role. Everybody's different, and you have to understand that when you think about writing a training program. So, pretty much just said all that. Also, last bullet there: pros are pros and we're not. So never compare yourself with a pro athlete of any kind. If you want, I mean, you can, but you got to realize they're a pro and you're not a pro. You're here, they're there for a reason. Okay, so just because nowadays in social media you see all these fitness people, they're so ripped and they do this and they do that. You know nothing about what they do behind the scenes, how hard they're training, what supplements they are or are not taking, and what they do with their lives, what surgeries they may or may not have. Okay, so realize that you're very different than them. Your athletes, your clients, your patients are all very different from them. So you have to be very specific with your programming. So you could have 20 different athletes, give them all the same workout, and you can get 20 different responses. And it's that happens all the time when you train athletes. Why? Some people come in with different levels of training. Sadly, genetics plays a huge role. And then it's not the biggest, but it could be a role, is gender. Yes, hormonal changes do play a role, but sometimes gender plays a role in certain things as well. Another principle is the reversibility principle. And this is essentially, if you don't use it, you lose it. Detraining rapidly occurs when you're done with a program. Only 1 to 2 weeks of detraining reduces metabolic and exercise capacity. So it doesn't take very long for you to see changes. Usually takes months for you to completely lose something. So like you have to be in like bed rest pretty much. But it takes months before you completely lose something. But it doesn't take much just to see a change. Even with trained athletes, they could see reversible effects. So you got to make sure that people stay with their exercise programs. If they're done with you as your trainer, you might see them again and be like, hey, what happened? You were so fit. And then be like, yeah, I took a couple months off after working with you, and they go right back to where they were. So they got to make sure they stay on it. And it's really hard for athletes to get back to super fit. Like if they were really fit and they took a lot of time off, it takes a long time to get back, and then even longer to improve. So if you don't use it, you lose it. That's the reversibility principle. There's also the principle of diminishing returns. Sorry, I know there's a lot of principles in terms of training. Performance gains are related to the level of training experience. So as training continues, strength and performance gains are more difficult to achieve. This is pretty straightforward. When you're a beginner, you see a lot of great changes right off the bat. But as you become an elite athlete, you could train harder and harder and harder and be so meticulous with your training and only see small changes. Even though you're an elite athlete, you're not going to be seeing these massive changes. I'm so out of shape when it comes to running. If I go to run a mile right now, it's going to be like a 15-minute mile. Through a little bit of training, I'm going to get that down to 12, 10, 8. That's a huge jump. It's almost 50% improvement. But then it'll go 7, 6.5, 6:15, 6:10, 6:05, 6, 5:55. So no matter how hard I train, it's just gonna, so those increments become smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's what's the point of diminishing returns. There comes a point where you train so hard, you're training harder and harder, you're not getting much back. So you got to be careful with those athletes that, a lot of these people, they get really difficult or really frustrated. That's when they might take some kind of supplement to help them break through that plateau. But people have to realize that, there's going to come a time I can only lift so much weight. I only could run so fast. I only could run so far. That's just who I am. I might not ever be an Olympic runner. It is what it is. It's who I am. Here's just a little bit more detailed image of that, where you see rate of adaptation in the dots right away. Novice, See tons of change immediately. Complexity of training is really simple. A lot of change, really simple. As someone becomes more and more fit, training becomes more and more complex, but the rate of change gets less and less and less. Performance gets better and better and better right away. Look at this steep incline, but then look at it trail off as you reach your genetic potential. So if you're training for 4 years, hard for 4 years, consecutively for 4 years, you're going to start not seeing much change between year 5, year 6, year 7. You're going to improve, but they're not going to be like the change you got from year 1, from year 0 to year 1, and from year 1 to year 2. These jumps are huge. Then the jump from year 3 to 4, not as big. That's the point of diminishing returns. Usually somewhere around here when we start thinking, we're putting a ton in and we're not getting a lot out. So in terms of detraining, a lot of different changes. You could see losses in cardiorespiratory endurance. A lot of that can be changes in the oxidative enzymes in the muscles. Glycolytic enzymes remain unchanged up to 84 days, so glycogen stores essentially can decrease. So storage capacity of the glycogen decreases. Your acid-base balance becomes disturbed, so how well you can really buffer out byproduct gets disturbed, and your capillary density actually can change in fiber type. So if you're an explosive athlete and you don't do anything explosive, guess what? Your fiber typing might shift a little bit to being a slower athlete. So you can see a lot of differences, and detraining plays a huge role. You can get a lot of these back. They take time, though. That's the problem. So researchers at Copenhagen asked 32 men, 17 in their 20s, so half in their 20s, half in their 60s and 70s, who wear a knee brace that mobilized one leg for 2 weeks. So they're essentially put in a one-legged cast in one leg for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, the younger men lost between 22 and 34% of their strength in their immobilized leg, and the older men lost 20 to 26. So on average, they lost about 25% of their strength in 2 weeks from not using their leg, which seems like probably what a lot of people do over Christmas break when they just lay in bed and do nothing. They regained the muscle mass after 6 weeks of cycling, but their leg strength was still 5 to 10% lower. So it took 6 weeks just to get the muscle mass back, and strength still wasn't there after 6 weeks. So it's 2 weeks to lose it, 6 weeks to get it back. That's the problem, because people can get in a vicious cycle where they keep taking time off and they'll never really get back to where they were. So the thing with detraining, and a lot of people freak out, is you don't have to worry about it. You're not going to lose muscle if you take a week off from training. You go home for Christmas or go home for Thanksgiving break, you'll be fine. After a 3-week break, you're going to start losing some muscle mass and some strength. So that's like Christmas break. You got to do some stuff in that gap. After 3 weeks, it's possible to lose mass, but there are other ways to mitigate that loss. Movement in any way really usually helps. People notice overtraining when they start to lose strength and body weight, so their normal reaction is to train more, making things worse. So you could be losing strength and decreasing body weight, but not detraining, but by actually overtraining, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So another example is you had 2 athletes, one that trained hard for 20 years, an Olympic lifting athlete. So let's say they started when they were 15 years old, Olympic lifting. They were a champion Olympic lifter, trained till they were 35. Let's say 30. They did 15 years. Started at 15, went for 15 years. This is actually true stuff too. I didn't make this up. Then they stopped for 5 years to go into the Army. Example 1. When they got back up from the Army after 5 years off, it only took 2 to 3 months to get back to 90% of their previous levels. So these motor units that were used for 15 to 20 years were completely ingrained in this person. They took 5 years off. It's like riding a bike. If you've been riding a bike for 20 years, you figure it out pretty quickly. You're not perfect, but you get it back pretty quickly. Now, if you had a brand new client, never did anything, trained for 8 months with you, then stopped. Actually, I take it back. They trained for a year, and they stopped for 8 months. That person lost 40% of their strength and about 10 pounds of muscle during that 8 months. Then they take 7 months to reach and exceed the previous level. So it takes, for a beginner, you lose things really quick. The body's not really ready to adapt, really ready to be prepared for that exercise. Then you're going to take a ton of time off. The body essentially forgets most of that. And then you're going to have to somehow not just get back to where you were, but then try to improve upon that. It's going to take a long time. Okay. Someone that's been doing it forever, it's not that hard. The body's prepared for it. The neuromuscular system is prepared for it. Someone that's brand new, it's not going to be like that. It's going to make it much more difficult. So you could read through this slide, but as a rule of thumb, you won't lose any strength or size from really a week off. There's no set rule on how fast we regain lost muscle. Minimum usually is a 1-to-1 time frame. So if you take 3 weeks off, it's going to take 3 weeks to put back on. Okay, so it's pretty simple. But everything is very, very highly variable, very different between individuals. So it's really hard to really say what's completely going to change. So one of the last topics in terms of training principles is overreaching and overtraining. We have overreaching and underreaching. Overreaching is not a bad thing. Pushing yourself into a mild state of fatigue with your training, purposely challenging yourself, going harder than normal. Regression in performance sometimes does occur during an overreach period, yet when you give yourself a rest, it's going to come back. Underreaching is when you intentionally take it easy. This is like taking your foot off the gas when you're training intentionally. It could also be good or bad depending on how you do it. So there's times where you train, but you're going lighter on purpose. That's underreaching, and there's times you overreach. So athletes may plateau or see a decrease in performance when you're overreaching. Typical response is frustration. Initial symptom of overreaching is going to be, I'm tired, I'm not seeing any results, this isn't working. What we need to do is tell them it's okay. We're going to keep pushing ourselves. It's okay if the weights go down or you think your strength's going down. Once you are able to give them some rest, reduce their workload, you'll see overcompensation or supercompensation, and you'll see that improved performance. So the body is just getting beat down little by little when you're going through overreaching, challenging yourselves a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Pushing yourselves a little bit harder than you normally push. You know what? You're getting fatigued. It's getting difficult. It's getting challenging. You're starting to really struggle. It's okay. Fight through it. But then once you give yourself some rest, let the body recover from all that, go through that restitution phase. When you come back from it, you're going to feel pretty good. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel stronger, faster. That's going to be the body overcompensating. Improved performance. So you could beat yourself down for a month, 3 weeks, give yourself a little bit of time off, and then that might be when you underreach. Purposely work out lighter to let your body recover. And then you'll be able to see some true changes. This image probably should be on the next page. This is more of a model of overtraining, where we're not giving ourselves time to recover. So overtraining occurs when you chronically overreach for months and years on end. So really just pushing yourself and never really letting your body recover. This is usually when we're going to see some serious changes in the body, maybe endocrine disruptions, hormonal changes. This happens a lot with pro athletes. And a lot of times distance runners are one of the worst ones because they never want to stop running. No matter what you say to them, they just want to consistently run. You got to get them to stop running. Bodybuilders always feel like they have to lift. They can never take time off. Ask a CrossFit person to stop exercising. That's never going to happen. Other sports like basketball, players are always shooting hoops even after practice. There's other sports out there like that too. Overtraining can be a big problem. It can affect both the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems. It can be pretty bad. You can have a nervous system imbalance from overtraining. If you have sympathetic overtraining situation there, During rest, you're going to feel restless, you're going to have weight loss, you're going to have increased heart rate, so you're going to be very anxious and jittery, uncomfortable. If you have parasympathetic situation due to overtraining, you're going to be really depressed, fatigued, slow heart rate. Parasympathetic training is the worst of the two. This usually means your neuroendocrine system is like exhausted. You've reached a really bad point. So a lot of times people will have like anxiety or be jittery or won't be able to fall asleep if if they've been overtrained and the sympathetic system is in overdrive. And you might hit the point of the parasympathetic where you just don't even want to move. So if we're looking at overreaching, here we might challenge ourselves, but give ourselves time to recover, and we'll overcompensate. And we'll do it again. Fatigue, recover, overcompensate. Fatigue, recover, overcompensate. Challenge yourself, fatigue, recover, overcompensate. And over time, when we're giving ourselves that rest, we'll keep moving. In terms of overtraining, we might be training too hard with very little rest. Actually, I need to change that, but what we see is this downward slope of the body not getting enough time to recover. So here's again the same thing. Total stress is getting higher and higher and higher and higher. We're overreaching, but if we keep pushing ourselves, keep increasing stress and increasing stress and increasing stress. That's spelled wrong. That should say, that should say decreased with an S. I took this off the internet. I thought it was a good image, but now that I see that spelled wrong, I don't know if I like that. But we're going to get ourselves in a position where we could hit overtraining. So how to detect overtraining? Pretty simple stuff. Body's fatigued, changes in appetite, weight loss, can't sleep, irritable, no motivation, no concentration, depressed. We could see changes in testosterone and cortisol. That's one way to look at it. Usually our testosterone will rise, and our cortisol actually will maintain or slightly rise over time. But when we add a stressor to the body, cortisol shoots up. So if you see this image here, days of training, we see increases in cortisol. Whenever you add a stress to the body, cortisol is going to rise. Over time, in an image like this, we start seeing this either no change or slight decrease in testosterone. One thing that we'll see is that this ratio from cortisol to testosterone, these things can cancel each other out in the body, essentially. So if cortisol rises and testosterone maintains itself, the negative effects of cortisol, like cortisol can be very catabolic, and it could break down muscle tissue, it could cause a lot of issues. Testosterone can balance that out. But if you have continually rising cortisol and you don't have a matching level of testosterone or progesterone or estrogen for females, you're going to have some major issues within the endocrine system. So you can go from an anabolic to catabolic state. So if your ratio decreases 30%, then recovery is insufficient. So if we see massive increases in cortisol with decreases in testosterone, you're going to get to your point of being extremely fatigued, potentially in a catabolic state, in a really bad situation. So this is when we get the endocrine really, really messed up, endocrine system really messed up. And it's something to pay attention to. It's a theory for the most part, but this is out of a research study. So I mean, there is research to show that this works, but there's a little bit of a theory that this could be one of the reasons for one of the major issues with overtraining. So overloading the hormonal system, problem is producing too much cortisol during training. That can be the enemy to a certain extent. Cortisol isn't necessarily horrible for the body, helps mobilize energy to help break down glycogen and fat for energy, but cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen are produced from the same hormone, the mother hormone. The more cortisol produced, the less of this hormone you'll have available to produce testosterone or estrogen, which again, cortisol can be catabolic, where your estrogen, progesterone can be anabolic, help you build that muscle. Problems with cortisol can decrease immunity, so because it inhibits white blood cells, it can increase body fat or shortage of abdominal fat, I'm not really sure why, but research says it can. Breaks down muscle, so it can be that catabolic state. Gluconeogenic hormone, so gluconeogenesis is the process that creates sugars from existing tissues. Cortisol promotes the breakdown of this for increases in really glycogen. Again, if you're really fatigued, you're going to try to be breaking down, or if you're training excessively, you're going to need more energy systems or energy sources. Your body's going to break this down. It can also inhibit the thyroid, which can help store fat as well. So, what causes overtraining? Multifactorial, a lot of reasons. Excessive training, excessive stress, abnormal responses to the nervous system, endocrine disturbances, psychological factors, poor nutrition. But any one of these can be a problem for an athlete, especially if there's a combination. It's a really big problem, which there's a lot of times there can be a combination for athletes. How do you treat overtraining? Try not to let it happen in the first place. A good coach won't let it happen in the first place. See the signs before they occur. That's really hard to come back from when someone's reached that state. They need a lot of rest and recovery. Remove whatever is causing it. If it's school, a class, a relationship, a sport, a coach, whatever it is. Sometimes recovery could take months, but you need to get away from there to let the body adapt. Things you can do if you're in overdrive with the sympathetic system: meditate, massage, hot tub, do deep water floating, a flotation tank, relaxation techniques. Get yourself to calm down. On the other end, if you have parasympathetic overtraining, we're already very in a depressed state or your low heart rate. You need to do the opposite. Sauna, cryo, deep tissue, cold water, something like that to kind of get yourself going again. So when we think of recovery and supercompensation, remember if we had fatigue, we're down here in this curve. We have to recover, and then we have these levels of supercompensation. Here's a nice actually chart showing how much time between hours that you might need to recover from each little phase. So that's actually kind of a really cool chart. So when we think of recovery, we're regaining what we lost, what we caused us to fatigue here. For the athlete, it's not enough to as it returns them only to where they started. Adaptation can be defined as the process of long-term adjustment. So when we're going to see, hopefully, our adaptations is going to be while we recover. In order to get fit, we must stimulate some fatigue so that our body adapts. We must push ourselves beyond the limits. Okay, that's the end of this video here. And then I'll post the second video on the aerobic energy systems as well.